In this video, let's look at adding and subtracting fractions. Let's start with things with a common denominator. In this case, if the denominators are the same, we would just add or subtract the numerators. So a over b plus c over b is a plus c over b. A over b minus c over b is a minus c over b. So as long as the denominators are the same, we can just add or subtract the numerators. As an example, 2/5 plus 1/5. 2 plus 1 is 3 over the common denominator of 5. The idea of what we're doing, here I have a bar that I have broken up into 5 pieces. The first fraction is 2/5, so that corresponds to 2 of these pieces. The second fraction is 1/5, so that corresponds to 1 of these pieces. So together I have a total of 3 pieces that are each of size 1/5, so a total of 3/5. What about 2/3 plus 2/3? Well, 2 plus 2 is 4 over the common denominator of 3. So I'm going to break a bar into thirds since I'm dealing with thirds here. The first fraction says I need 2 of these pieces. And the second fraction says I need 2 more, but I only have 1. So I need to add in a second bar so that I can get a total of 2 pieces for the second fraction. And now we can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces that are each of size 1/3. And when we draw this picture, it's much easier to see that this is 1 and 1/3. What about 7/8 minus 3/8? Well, 7 minus 3 is 4 over 8. And we can see that these have a 4 in common, so I can divide the top and the bottom by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2, so my solution would be 1/2. If I think about this in terms of my bar, so here I have a bar that I've broken up into pieces of size 1/8. I start with 7 of them. And then I'm actually going to get rid of 3 of them. So we're going to erase 1, 2, 3 of them. And now I can see that there are a total of 4 left. And these are of size 1/8. I can also see if I draw a bar down the center of this, half of it's shaded and half of it's not. So this is how we can see that this is equivalent to 1/2. Now let's look at 1/2 plus 1/3. So essentially, I need to find a common denominator here. So I'm going to start by finding the common denominator and showing this process, and then I'll show what this looks like on my fraction bars. The least common denominator is the smallest number that they both divide into evenly. And if you're ever in doubt, you can always just multiply these two. It might not give you the smallest common denominator, but it will give you a common denominator. 2 times 3 is 6. Well, that means we need 6 on the bottom of both of these fractions. 2 times 3 is 6. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. 3 plus 2 is 5 over 6. So let's look at what this looks like in our fraction bars. So here I have 2 bars of the same size. The first fraction says we need 1/2 of a bar, so we have this 1/2 shaded over here. The second one says we need 1/3, so we have this 1/3 of a bar over here. And we can't really combine these because they're essentially different units. These pieces are different sizes, so we can't count up how many we have. So instead, we need to find our common denominator. Since our common denominator was 6, we need to break these pieces up into pieces of size 1 over 6. So when I break them up into 1/6, the idea that we need 3 of these pieces to line up with 1 of these is because I multiplied the first fraction, the top and the bottom, by 3. The fact that we need 2 of the 1/6 pieces to line up with the 1/3 is because I multiplied the top and the bottom of that fraction by 2. So I'm going to need 3 of these 1/6 pieces to correspond to the 1/2. And 2 of these 1/6 pieces to correspond to the 1/3. So now we can actually combine them, see that we have 5 pieces shaded that are each of size 1 over 6. Now let's look at 3/4 plus 5/6. In this case, my least common denominator would be 12, since 12 is the smallest number that both of these divide into. To get to 12, 4 times 3 is 12, so 3 times 3 is 9. 6 times 2 is 12, so 5 times 2 is 10. And then we add the tops to get 19 over 12. However, like I said, if you're in doubt, you can just multiply the denominators. 4 times 6 is 24. This is not the least common denominator, but it is a common denominator. In this case, I would multiply the top and the bottom of the first fraction by 6. 3 times 6 is 18. I would multiply the second fraction, the top and the bottom, by 4. 5 times 4 is 20. 18 plus 20 is 38 over 24. We can see these have a 2 in common, so I can divide the top and the bottom by 2. And when I do, I get 19 over 12. So if you can't find the least common denominator, it's not that big of a deal. You can multiply the two denominators to get a common denominator, which will work the same way. Let's do a subtraction. 2 over 7 minus 1 over 9. In this case, my least common denominator, 7 times 9, which is 63. I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of the first fraction by 9 to get 18 over 63. And multiply the top and the bottom of the second fraction by 7 to get 7 over 63. 18 minus 7 is 11, so my final answer, 11 over 63.